you've stepped off the lighted road and onto a path that few return from. Welcome to the hunting path 1408. Tonight's story is one that should have never been told. Chapter 5. 4 years had carved their mark on Lily, not just in height and the lengthening of her limbs, but in the quiet strength that settled in her eyes. She was 14 now, the small girl who had clung to her father's hand, replaced by a capable, self-reliant young woman. The cabin, once a temporary refuge, had become her entire world, and the remote mountain woods her classroom. Her daily routine was a testament to David's lessons, a meticulous dance with survival. Mornings began before the sun fully kissed the mountaintops. She'd rise from her bunk, the air still cool and crisp, and check the snares she'd set the previous evening. Her movements were fluid and silent, honed by years of traversing the forest floor. More often than not, a rabbit or a squirrel would be waiting, providing the protein that kept her strong. She'd bring it back to the cabin, clean it with practiced efficiency, and prepare it for cooking over the small propane stove or the outdoor fire pit. Afternoons were dedicated to refining her skills. She'd spend hours by the lake, casting her fishing line, her patience unwavering even when the fish weren't biting. She knew which berries were safe to eat, which roots could be boiled for a bitter but nourishing tea thanks to the edible plants book she still carried everywhere. She practiced tracking game through the densest undergrowth, her eyes scanning for broken twigs, faint prints, or disturbed leaves. The rifle, once an impossibly heavy burden, now felt like an extension of her arm. She practiced daily, her aim true, her movements precise, firing at targets she set up deep in the woods, the sharp crack of the gunshot a familiar, almost comforting sound in the vast silence. She could clean it blindfolded, her fingers knowing every groove and mechanism. The ham radio, though still mostly static, was a constant companion. A faint whisper of a world she barely remembered, a ghost of a connection she desperately clung to. Evenings were for a simple meal by the fire, the crackle of burning wood a stark contrast to the quiet hum of her old life. She'd often sit on the porch, watching the stars emerge, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Sometimes she'd pull out her worn copy of The Secret Garden, losing herself in a world of beauty and hope, a stark contrast to her own reality. She still spoke to her father, sometimes aloud, sometimes in her head, especially when faced with a difficult decision or a moment of profound loneliness. "What would you do, Dad?" she'd murmur, looking at the quiet lake or the flickering flames of the fire. The oak tree, his grave beneath it, was a silent confidant, a constant reminder of the promise she had kept and the burden she carried. His memory was a guiding star, a source of both pain and unwavering resolve. One crisp autumn morning, the air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth, she was tracking a deer, its fresh prints clear in the damp earth near a small creek bed. The hunt was going well. She was close. She moved slowly, rifle held ready, her breath controlled, her senses alert. As she rounded a thick cluster of rhododendrons, their leaves a deep, glossy green even in the cooler weather, she stopped dead. There it was, a deer, a young buck, standing unnaturally still in a small clearing. Its head was down but not grazing. Its fur was matted and patchy in places, and its eyes were wrong, milky and unfocused, just like David's had been in his final moments. A low, wet gurgle escaped its throat, a sound that sent a jolt of pure visceral terror through Lily, a cold dread that spread from her stomach to her fingertips. It was a sound she hadn't heard in 4 long years, a sound she had hoped to never hear again. Her grip on the rifle tightened, her knuckles white against the cold metal. This wasn't a normal sick animal. This was it, the infection, spreading. She hadn't seen one of them since that terrible day in the cabin, since she had pulled the trigger on her own father. Not a human, not an animal. The isolation of the mountains had been a blessing, a bubble of false security, a fragile peace she had clung to. Now that bubble had burst, violently. The deer lurched, its movements stiff and uncoordinated, its head snapping up. It sniffed the air, its vacant gaze sweeping the clearing, then seemed to fix on her, though without true sight. Lily froze, barely breathing, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the woods. It was the same mindless hunger, the same grotesque parody of life. Her mind flashed back to the grocery store, to the man on the floor, to her father's last moments, the image of his transforming face searing itself into her memory. The memory was a fresh wound, raw and painful, as if it had happened yesterday. She remembered the fear, the confusion, the utter helplessness of that day. But she wasn't that 10-year-old girl anymore. She was 14. She was a survivor. David had made sure of that. Slowly, carefully, she raised the rifle. Her hands trembled, but her aim was steady, a testament to countless hours of practice. The buck was still, its head tilted, a silent, horrifying testament to the pervasive nature of the plague. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, just as David had taught her, focusing on the target, pushing down the rising tide of nausea and grief. The shot echoed through the quiet woods, sharp and final, shattering the stillness. The deer dropped, its unnatural existence extinguished. Lily stood there for a long moment, the scent of gunpowder mingling with the damp earth and decaying leaves, her body shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and a renewed, profound fear. The peace of her sanctuary had been irrevocably shattered. She walked slowly towards the fallen animal, rifle still raised, confirming it was truly dead. The sight of it, a once majestic creature reduced to this grotesque form, solidified a chilling realization. The cabin was safe, yes, but the wilderness itself was no longer entirely free of the plague. The infection was creeping, finding its way into the remote corners, into the very animals she relied on for food. There was no true safety, not anymore. She stood there for a long time, staring at the dead deer, then up at the towering trees, their autumn leaves a riot of red and gold, and finally towards the distant, hazy mountains. The isolation that had protected her for so long now felt like a cage, a lonely prison. This wasn't just about surviving day to day anymore. This was about finding a future, if one even existed. "It's time, Dad," she whispered to the silent woods, to the memory of him, a tear finally escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. "It's time to move. I can't stay here forever. You wouldn't want me to." The thought was terrifying, a leap into the unknown, but also exhilarating. The cabin had been her sanctuary, a place of healing and learning, but it was also a tomb of memories, a constant reminder of what she had lost. She needed to know if there was anything left of the world, if there were other people. Maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there was a place, a community, where people lived without this constant gnawing fear, where she wouldn't be so utterly alone. The world was vast, and she had to believe there was more than just endless wilderness and the shuffling dead. She turned and headed back towards the cabin, her stride purposeful, a new resolve hardening her features. She would pack the SUV again, but this time she wouldn't be running from something, but towards a possibility, towards hope. She would leave the lake, the grave under the oak tree, and the quiet, lonely life she had built. The wilderness had taught her to survive, but now it was time to see if she could truly live. You've reached the end of this story, but the path doesn't stop here. Shadows still stir, the walls still whisper. So if you're still listening, you've taken another step down the haunting path 1408. Subscribe if you dare to walk it again.